Hi everyone, I am Sanya Kuller, and in this video, I sort of want to motivate to you why, for artificial intelligence and deep learning, why is it that we want to be able to use um, the biology of the brain and how neurons are connected in our brain? Like, why is understanding that biology so important to us for what we're trying to do? So how can we determine, for instance, if this is a cat, a real live cat or not, or a teddy bear that you can hug? How can we determine that? So what I want to show you guys is the following. It's a nice article here where it's sort of talking about the relationship between biological and artificial intelligence. So intelligence is basically, and thank you, George Savora, it's the ability of humans to accomplish tasks that are generally hard for computers and animals. So artificial intelligence is a field that tries to accomplish these tasks using computers. So it's usually based on biological intelligence, right? So if you're able to mimic the mechanisms of biological intelligence, you should be more successful. So what this is meaning is that if you're building a model for prediction of anything, and you're using the way that biology, the way that neurons are interacting with each other in different networks to give us signaling, if you're using biology, then the artificial intelligence should be even better, because we're trying to mimic what makes us intelligent. How can we recognize a cat from a dog or a real life cat from a teddy? So if we're using machine learning approaches and deep learning that is going on biological ways that give us intelligence, how our neurons connect, we have a better chance of being even more successful. So I sort of want to show you what talks about all of the different things, all of the different milestones that we've reached as well. So, like, how can we have an AI defeat the world's chess master? It's a great challenging game, but we have an AI that has been able to defeat the world's chess master. So what machine learning is it's a branch in artificial intelligence where machines learn to solve a problem without being given a set of rules on how to solve a task. So this is usually achieved by learning new rules, by repeatedly trying the task again and again and getting feedback. Were you correct with the prediction that you made or not? If you're predicting that this image is of a cat, but it's actually of a dog, and you are told that, hey, you're wrong, the AI, artificial intelligence, is told that, it takes this feedback on how well it does and goes back and tries to learn again. So this is the first fundamental similarity between current progress in artificial intelligence and biological intelligence as well. So it's how artificial intelligence, how these mathematical approaches overlap with these biological intelligence, with how our brain works, how we're able to think and solve problems. So we were not born with an ability to recognize the objects surrounding us. And we were not really told rules allowing us to identify those objects for the most part. Instead, we've seen a very large number of objects that were sometimes labeled, like parents are saying, teddy, water, like they're pointing out objects to you. They're pointing out pen, like they're pointing out the objects, and you can learn these from experience. So the parents pointing out to you many different things, like candle, like they're pointing out many things, and that's how you sort of learn, from repeated exposure to things as well, and sort of through your environment around you, you can learn things. So that's also how machine learning works. So computers are usually shown millions of pictures of different objects until they gradually learn what dogs, hats, cats look like. So this is one of the most important principles driving the current success of AI. Is it's how we learn through so many examples when we're babies about what is each thing, what is an what is a teddy, what is a jack-o'-lantern, this is a cow, For instance, we say the cow goes moo, that this is a flower. We have so many things that we are learning. You know, we can see that this is a keychain. So we have so many things, and there's still many differences between artificial intelligence and biological intelligence. So, you know, what machines are learning and how our brain is actually going and signaling with these neurons to give us intelligence. But the machinery that has allowed computers to learn these powerful rules, these are artificial neural networks. It's actually inspired by neural networks in biological brains. You know, how we are able to think and signal. In our brain, we have these neurons, these types of neurons here. And we also have glial cells, which are helping support neurons, but neurons are mainly doing all the signaling in our cells. They're doing all the signaling in our brain, helping us feel all sorts of things, coordinating motor movement. They're doing so many things that I've talked about in the previous video about how they're helping coordinate your movement, helping, you know, your emotions, your reactions to things. If you put your hand on a candle, why does your hand jerk back? So neurons are doing all of that. And these are other cells, glia, that are also helping support those neurons. So based on how neurons are signaling in our brains, we have come up with artificial neural networks to help with machine learning, to try to come up with these machines that sort of mimic how our brain, how these neurons are connected in our brain. We come up with, you know, a mathematical model that allow us to do that better. You know, so how this resemblance helps the abilities of this technology and how deeply some of these similarities go. So the tasks accomplished by artificial neural networks. So these are the deep learning models that we'll talk about that help you kind of, you know, make these predictions as well. So 1 second. They're so cute. Okay, so how can I predict if this cat is a real cat or if this cat is like a fake or as a teddy? So I can use machine learning to be able to make this prediction if this cat is real or not. Or how can I classify this cute little cat as being a cat or being a dog? So you see, like a real cat, it ran away, but this guy is here, this teddy is here to skunkle and stay. So how can we do that? Well, we have some machine learning approaches here that can help us make this sort of prediction. You know, is it a cat? Is it a dog? What is this exactly? So you want to classify, these are images of cats here, these are images of dogs over here, and how can we tell them apart? So this is like a classification problem in machine learning. We want to figure out, like, we know what a cat is, what a dog is. We've grown up, we've seen lots and lots of examples in our lives. You know, sometimes we may mistake one for the other, you know, for whatever reason. And then we're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's actually a cat. Or that cat looks like a dog a lot, for instance. You know, you might make some mistakes, but we generally know how to tell them apart. Telling the different breeds of cats and dogs, now that's kind of a little bit challenging. Like the cat I was holding is a British short hair, for instance, but you know, there's so many short hair cat, but there's so many different types. Like this one I think could be like a striped cat or a tabby cat. There's also this really cute cat that I'm really obsessed with that's known as a Russian Samoyed. These are very, very adorable dogs that I just wanted to take that second to show you guys that that there are these very, very cute Russian Samoyeds that are so adorable. So if you can get these, you know, I love such dogs. They're so cute. Anyways, so we can sort them into cats and dogs. And the idea is that it's a supervised machine learning task. So what this is we kind of know the outcome. We know for the images, for instance, and then again, this doesn't have to be images for artificial intelligence. The data can be any, but in this example, I'm using image data. So, you know, this is a classification task as well, and it's under, so the supervised machine learning that has classification and regression tasks. But under this, so this is all under supervised machine learning. They have these two tasks here. One is regression and one is classification. So if you know the outcomes, you can come up with models that can kind of predict them. So the supervised machine learning, and there's, that has classification and regression there. So it's a classification in this situation because it's either a cat or it's a dog. So we have the two classes, like based on whatever features we have, it can be, this can be a cat. Let's make it the same color, a cat, or it can be a dog here. So we have these two groups here, cat or a dog, and it's a classification task. So it's a classification task under supervised machine learning, which is one of the three main branches of machine learning. There's unsupervised machine learning, there's supervised machine learning, and there is reinforcement learning. So those three main groups. And why it's supervised is because we know the outcomes. We know if the image is of a cat and of a dog, and we can give those labels. If we didn't give those labels, then it would be unsupervised machine learning, where an algorithm could try to find patterns. Hopefully it would recognize that certain images could look like one group, and which it doesn't know are cats, but it might just group the images into a few different groups. And then you can possibly see that they're cats and dogs. But that's unsupervised, where you're not really told what the outcomes are. But for supervised, you know the outcomes, you know the classes here, it's a cat and a dog versus a dog. So it's a classification problem here. For regression, it's sort of predicting some value, like what would be your SAT scores, or what would be your probability of getting into a certain college, or what is your the probability of that this movie is going to be successful, or what is the box office revenue that you're supposing that the movie will earn. Like those are continuous values on a range that you're predicting, which we're not doing. So we're doing classification. So within that, there's machine learning, and then there's deep learning, which is like a subfield within machine learning, where without needing to extract any features, which you need to do for machine learning. For machine learning, you would need to specify that, like a cat, like why does it look like a cat, maybe the size, the whiskers, whatever makes it a cat and not a dog. You would need to sit and extract those features and then kind of put it into a model to predict if it's a kitten, a puppy, or none of the above. So that's what you need to do in machine learning. But then there's deep learning. So like this machine learning approach can be like decision trees, logistic regression models. It can be different models that you can try to use. But especially for image data, and again, images can be represented as numbers. So what is important to know is that you can represent an image. This is Abraham Lincoln. You can have an image that is of these pixels, that's made up of these pixels. It can be represented as a matrix of numbers here. And that's all like, these image detection, and image classification, machine learning algorithms are just kind of working with these images and these pixels and these numbers. And so they're working with numbers and data at the end of the day. So you can use those, especially for deep learning. It does really well on image data. And what it does is you just have to give many, many images of cats that you've labeled as cats, many, many images of dogs that you've labeled as dogs, and other animals as needed. And you have to label it, like, what the class is. And then you put it in a deep learning model. And this model is usually based on how our brain, how our neurons are signaling and connected with each other. And then what happens is it makes a prediction, but it extracts features. So somewhere it needs a lot of data. That's a weakness of deep learning. It's one of the subfields in machine learning. And this extracts features from thousands and thousands of images. It's going to figure out something about how the pixels and how everything kind of works to give you this image of a cat. It's trying to learn those features within itself. But in any case, this is what we're focused on when we talk about artificial intelligence. We usually focus as well on deep learning, like focusing on how our brain, how these neurons, so each of these little circles here, these look a lot like neurons that are signaling in our brains. And our task, as I was mentioning, is classification. So if you're given an image of this very cute cat, you want to figure out if this is a panda, if this is a dog, if this is a cat. So, what is the probability of each of these? Here there are three classes. There's cats, there's dogs, there's pandas. Now, when I think of pandas, I think of Python, pandas data frame. So that's a sign that maybe I'm programming a bit too much. So anyways, so given all these images, like what is the probability that if you're given a new image, that it's going to be a cat? And we know that this is a cat, but we want our model to be really confident that it is a cat so that it will identify it properly as a cat. So one of the approaches is like, convolutional neural networks. So whenever you see neural networks, these are artificial neural networks. This is like sort of mimicking how the neurons in our brain are signaling to each other. So this is just one of the popular approaches working on image data. But you can see here that it's sort of training in this sort of a network, this deep learning network. It's sort of training like this, it has labeled photos of cats and dogs. This is a cute little tabby cat. And you can see that it's trying to generate predictions. It's a cat, you got it. It's, you've labeled these photos and you're putting it into the model and it's trying to learn something. It's like neurons are signaling, trying to learn, make a connection in our brain. And it's like, hey, I understand this image, you've labeled it as a cat and I'm making some adjustments here. So it's a cat. Yes, I've got it. I understand that this is the cat. That's sort of what's happening. Behind the scenes, it's sort of learning a network like this to take this image and then predict the output from it. So like, yes, I got it. I got that it's a cat. And similarly, we have all these labels and images, cat, cute. This is a dog. It's cute, but it's no cat. And even this is cute, but this is also no cat. It's a little teddy. So we have all the images of cats and things that are not cats, and we put it in every pixel of the image. We kind of take the image apart and then we kind of put it like, we sort of take each row by row and we stack it. Each of these rows sort of becomes like an input node, to the neural network, which I'll talk about as well. But, you sort of take each row and then the next row, then the next row, and you sort of stack it into a set of these neurons. And that's the input, every pixel of the image. And you can see that they sort of talk about these as being neurons, like not the biological neuron, but based on that, but artificial intelligence neurons. So the algorithm, so it takes all these images and you might be wondering, well, what is happening behind the scenes here? How is it saying that, if it's a cat, I got it? So it's taking these images and it's taking the pixels out of the images, which I showed you that like every image, you can take the pixels, map it to these values here. Like this 160, this part here maps to this, which is just essentially 157. These are all values here. And you just can put those values here as neurons. Then in the next layer, so it's just like neuron signaling, you can see, is this a line? This neuron is asking, is this a line in the image? Is this a circle in the image? Is this a triangle? It's trying to figure out, eyes, it's trying to figure out, the ear shape maybe of the triangles here. Is this an ear? Is this a nose? Is this an eye? Each of the neurons is asking all these questions here. That's what each neuron is focusing on. Like, for signaling in our bodies, but for neurons that are doing motor movement. So, like if you're trying to do motor movement, reflexes, for instance, there's so many things that are associated with us being able to do these motor movements in our body, how neurons control muscle movement as well. The neurons in our brain control muscle movement. Neurons are signaling with each other. There's a neuron here that is signaling to each other in our brain and our spinal cord. It's all a set of neurons signaling with each other. Central nervous system, spinal cord, upper motor neuron, lower motor neuron. It's all about these are little neurons here that are signaling to each other along our spinal cord, the sensory neurons. We have neurons that are signaling and doing everything, like helping control our movement, our behavior, our emotions, essentially. So similarly, Like there's a neuron here that's asking is if it's a line, is this an eye, is this a nose, is this fur, is this a cat, is this an ear, is this a triangle? So all of the neurons are asking a bunch of different questions. And ultimately, after taking all that data together, it's like, in our minds, we can identify without even thinking how we're doing it. If there's something that is, a cat or a dog, like we can make these, we can recognize these things. And how do we do that? So then if this is a cat, yes or no, and then we're seeing if we're making a prediction based on the model, and there's some weights that are learned here that are connecting neurons to each other, but we're making a prediction from an image. It's sort of like this formula that we construct from learning from thousands and thousands of images, and for deep learning, the more images, the better. But after doing that, we come up with a prediction. The model comes up with a prediction. Is this a dog or is this a cat? Like, is this a cat? Yes or no? And if this image that we were looking at is a cat. So we were looking at this image in particular. And if it's a cat, which it is, and it says yes, then that prediction is correct. That is correct. That is awesome. We predicted correctly. This was a cat and we predicted it. But if we instead take in the dog and then we predicted that it's a cat, then this is wrong. So we need to train it and make those predictions. So in the training, what we do is we pass in so many label data on what is a cat as our training data into a machine learning algorithm. So we spend all this time labeling what a cat is. And ultimately, we build this little robot, this little happy robot, this machine learning artificial intelligence robot to help us predict what is a dog, what's a cat, and what's not a cat. Like we've built an algorithm, we've built an AI, an artificial intelligence robot. You can pretend it's a robot as well. And for testing, then what happens is you actually take these images and you don't know what they are. So you know that these are cats here. You've labeled them from before when you were training them into your algorithm. The algorithm is sort of learning what each neuron should be. It's trying to figure out everything, like the best algorithm that will help you identify if it's a cat or not. That's what it's sort of learning behind the scenes. Each neuron is doing a specific task. Just like how in biology, we have these neurons that are doing different things, motor neurons, we have sensory neurons, we have interneurons. We have so many neurons, that are coordinating, motor neuron, the muscles, some neurons are responsible for innervating, for giving the energy and movement to muscles. So neurons are doing so many different things. So many different things are being caused, vision, as well how we process that information. So in training, we've given the labels and we're trying to learn what each neuron, so each neuron are these little circles here, we're trying to figure out. So when we put this image of a cat in, what happens is certain neurons are activated as shown in green. Like, is this a line? Yes. Is this fur? Yes. So we go along here. Is this a cat? Yes. And then what also gets activated is another neuron that's asking, is this a circle? Is this a triangle? Is this an ear? So all of those were correct. So that's what's highlighted here are the neurons that got lit up, that got activated. And that's like neurons are getting activated as I'm speaking to you guys, as I'm like carrying this candle, neurons are being activated. Neurons are being constantly activated as needed. If I'm not moving certain muscles, then they're going to get weak. Neurons are not really exerting themselves. So that's what happens in the training step. We give labels, we build out an algorithm that looks something like this. And then in our testing, what happens is we then take these images of some dogs. This is definitely a dog. This is also a dog. We give images of cats and dogs, but we don't tell the algorithm what it is. It's like on your test, when you're training, when you're practicing for your school test, you can see the answers, you can like get help, from your parents, from your teachers, from your friends, you can get help, siblings on your work while you're struggling on it. And then, that's a training time. You can see the answers, get help. But when the testing comes, then you kind of don't know the answers until you get your grades back, on the exam. But then you just see how you did on the algorithm. You take this algorithm that you learned when training, And then you take the images that you don't know the answer to, and you put it into this little robot, this little algorithm here. You put it in this machine learning algorithm. So this robot can represent the algorithm. And the algorithm is essentially this part here. So, this network that was learned, it's like sort of like the robot has a little brain behind kind of learning all of that. So you take these images, put them in the machine learning algorithm, and then you can kind of predict if this is a cat or not a cat. So you make those predictions based on your machine learning algorithm. That's the testing. So, you can just take all these images and you can see this image is of a dog and this image is of a cat. So you can make those predictions as needed. So all of this is mimicking essentially how our brain is working. That's what this is doing, like how our brain is working. So the tasks accomplished by artificial neural networks that resemble those accomplished by biological intelligence, The similarities and differences between artificial network is what we were talking about right now, where we're trying to figure out what those nodes are doing, how are they connected. And this is a biological neural network, looks like this. Essentially, in the biological neural network, you have like neurons that are communicating with each other. In a real life, we have these neurons and then they're communicating with each other here. You can see that it can even be so complicated in our brain, like all these neurons communicating with each other. Like so many branches, in our brains. We have so many neurons, like this neuron's communicating with this neuron, sending information across. Neurons are communicating with so many other neurons. It gets very, very complicated. You can see, this neuron, they're all communicating with each other in the brain. You can see that, like there's so many connections that are possible. So I'll just give you guys a second to just view this, in the biological and neural networks, we have these neurons that are just communicating with each other. Many neurons are communicating, the input, and we have, that's in the dendrites, and then it's being processed, and then there's an action potential, it propagates down the axon and then gets released, a neurotransmitter gets released and that goes to the next neuron. So just basically neurons are signaling to each other. So that's really cool because the similarities, they're being used to validate methods in artificially replicating biological intelligence. To see how our brain is working, how the cells, are signaling, and we have glial cells and then we have neurons, So in our brain, we have these glial cells and also these neurons. So we have neurons and then we have glial cells. And then so this is neurons and glial cells. These are cells that support neurons. So we have like, you see, if this yellow is a neuron, we have these Schwann cells in like the peripheral nervous system. We have these oligodendrocytes, which are so cute. They're just like glial cells, cells in the brain that are helping support in the central nervous system. They're helping support the myelin for these neurons. Neurons are wrapped around myelin sheath to help them spread signals faster. Many neurons are wrapped around them. And we have these oligodendrocytes that are actually doing the wrapping around the neurons. We have the astrocytes, you can see these blood vessels, ependymal cells. We have microglial cells, which are the immune system cells in the brain. We have many different cells in the brain. And there's other approaches computationally to kind of figure out what are all the different cell types in the brain. Oligodendrocytes, you can see endothelial, microglia, so many different types of cells. So, but this view is simplified. So basically, this is just a review of biology, so a number of simplifications were made, but neurons send signals to other neurons by releasing a chemical neurotransmitter like serotonin, dopamine, dopamine, serotonin, GABA, so many different neurotransmitters into a synapse. The synapse is a gap, it's a small little gap between the two neurons, actually. So this is the synapse, if you look into it. This is a synapse between this neuron and this other neuron. This is a small gap. neurotransmitters are like chemical signals, chemical messengers, like dopamine, reward, behavior. So these little chemicals are released by this neuron and they sort of bind to channels and this next neuron. They cross this gap that's called a synapse. A synapse is the gap between the two neurons. So they cross and they bind to channels here on the neuron. And when they bind, then all these ions can come inside, and then this can alter the voltage within the cell. So the chemical signal in the synapse is transformed into an electrical signal traveling down the dendrite. So this is the dendrite. Dendrites are the root of a neuron containing synapses. Multiple electric signals traveling multiple different dendrites are integrated as they travel towards the neuron body. So, signals from this neuron, from many neurons are being combined here, so neurotransmitters as chemicals are binding to the channels on the neurons. When they bind, then ions come inside the neuron. And if there is enough, then something is triggered known as an action potential. So let's discuss an action potential. So this is an action potential here. So you can see that, it's an action potential. These are sodium ions, potassium ions out. So at resting state, the voltage within the neuron is negative 70 millivolts. So it's 70 millivolts more negative inside the neuron than outside the neuron. And when you get like action potentials and from other neurons release neurotransmitters, then ions are coming in. So when one neuron is firing and finishes its action potential, it releases neurotransmitters that bind to the channels on the next neuron, that's receiving the signal. And when they're binding, then ions are coming inside. And if enough ions come inside that it reaches a threshold of negative 55, so if like over 15 millivolt positive increase, so more positive ions coming inside the neuron, then it reaches the negative 55 threshold and then it fires an action potential. If it doesn't, then nothing happens. So it needs to reach this threshold. So what happens is, an action potential. So if it reaches negative 55 millivolts, an action potential is signaled, it's reached, and it travels down the axon toward other neurons. And so if it reaches the certain threshold, right, of negative 55 millivolts, then an action potential, an electrochemical signal is triggered in the neuron body. Otherwise, if it doesn't reach that stimulus, if it doesn't fire, then that signal just dies out. It just dies out if it doesn't get enough of the signal. If it doesn't, it's a failed initiation. It needs to really cross this. And no matter what, as long as it crosses this negative 55, whether it's negative 52 or negative 50, negative 30, whatever it is, as soon as it crosses this there's too much of electrical charge, that it's reached the stimulus. The stimulus has reached the threshold and it always signals like this. It always goes up, to positive 40 here and then down. That usually always happens with the action potential. But that's sort of how neurons signal between this neuron and this neuron. And if it reaches the action potential, then it's going to signal and spread this electrochemical charge down the axon and then release neurotransmitters into the synapse. And then the same thing will happen here to this neuron, where it will get the ions. And then if it gets enough for maybe this neuron and for many other neurons as needed, and it reaches that, then it's going to fire as well. So both types of neurons integrate the signal arriving from multiple neurons. They transform it with a nonlinear function and output it to further neurons. So they get all these, signals from these other neurons. They do something with it, like all these neurotransmitters are binding, ions are coming inside, and then, the positive and negative ions inside the neuron, and it's trying to figure out if it crosses a threshold, then it fires. Okay, so this is sort of like how we can figure out all of this stuff, right? Biologists. Okay, so this article, the reason I wanted to show this to you guys is to sort of motivate what I want to talk about, which is how, biology can help us learn about neural networks. And in fact, there was a paper that was just published a few days ago a Nature Communications, a very top journal that talks about neural heterogeneity that promotes robust learning. So the brain is a hugely diverse heterogeneous structure. Whether or not heterogeneity at the neural level plays a functional role remains unclear. Like whether or not like how diverse the brain is, if it has a role on many brain diseases and other things, we don't know. So, they're trying to figure out, right? Maybe an active and important role, learning to changing environments. So they're trying to figure out, the different ways in which we can learn in our brains. So this is a very top journal here. It's published here, and you can see that this is trying to figure out, membrane potentials and all of those things here in different brain regions as well. So that article was actually mentioned in Neuroscience News. You can see this cute little neuron here. So brain cell differences could be key to learning in humans and artificial intelligence. So the study reveals why human brains are so good at learning. The findings could help with the development of more efficient artificial intelligence models. So that's what they're saying, that if you use whatever like biologists are discovering about the brain, if we can keep on integrating that knowledge into our artificial intelligence models, we can have even more efficient models. And the source is Imperial College London. So it's really, really elite university that has found all of this information. So that's my British accent attempt. So the new study found that by tweaking the electrical properties of individual cells in simulation of brain networks, so the actual real biological networks, the networks learned faster than simulations of identical cells. So our work suggested having a diversity of neurons in both brains and AI systems fulfills both these requirements and can boost learning. The brain is made up of billions of cells called neurons, which are connected by vast neural networks. These are the real biological networks that allow us to learn about the world. Neurons are like snowflakes. They look the same from a distance, but on further inspection, it's clear that no two are exactly alike. Even within neurons, we have so many different types of neurons. For instance, you can see here that we already have like, we have all these multipolar neurons. We also have like, motor neurons, sensory neurons, interneurons, which are bipolar neurons. We have like unipolar sensory neurons here, pyramidal cells. We have so many different types of neurons. And it's like a snowflake from a distance. You can think they're the same, but when you go up and you zoom in, you'll see that each snowflake is actually like very different from each other. No two are exactly alike. And even in what I was showing you guys, in this artificial neural network, so this is fake, this is all like a biological model, like based computational version of it. We're trying to come up with functions like this neuron's going to figure out if it's a line, this one's going to figure out if it's fur, if it's an eye, if it's a nose, if it's an ear, triangle, or circle. Like each neuron is going to do different things. So by contrast, each cell in an artificial neural network, the technology on which AI is based is identical, with only their connectivity varying. So what they typically try to do is, each neuron in these biological neural networks tends to be identical, but the only real difference between them could be like which neurons other neurons are connected to. Like maybe like this neuron, may not be connected to this neuron, but it actually ended up being. But you can see like some neurons may not always be connected with other neurons. But this is a fully connected network where each neuron is connected to other neuron, to each neuron in one layer. Each of these are layers. It's connected with the neurons in the other layer, like here, 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 here. This is connected to each of these. But what could vary is that, right? Despite the speed at which AI technology is advancing, their neural networks do not learn as accurately or quickly as the human brain does. So we still wonder, why can't we, pass the Turing test? Why can't we have, AI that's so good at learning just like the human brain? And researchers wonder if the lack of cell variability might be a culprit. Neurons are also doing so many different things in our bodies, and no two neurons are doing the same thing. So they set out to study whether emulating the brain, like copying the brain by varying neural network cell properties, could boost learning and AI. And what they found is that the variability in the cells improved their learning and reduced energy consumption. So they actually found that if they can copy what we've discovered about the brain, about neurons doing different tasks, if they improve and implement that in AI, so that neurons are also doing very different things and having variability, that we can learn better. So they were trying to see if, like, maybe in our artificial neural network, what if it's too simple? We need to try to capture the complicatedness, like how complex our brain is in some model mathematically. We need to see how we can represent these networks of neurons in this way, but how can we make it more effective? So they, found that this actually was a success. So evolution has given us incredible brain functions, most of which we are only just beginning to understand. Our research suggests that we can learn vital lessons from our own biology to make AI work better for us. So they're doing different tasks, right? So they tweak the time, how each cell decides what it wants to do based on what cells are connected to it are doing. Some cells die quickly, looking at only connected cells, so they're trying to figure this out. So when they changed the variability in the simulated networks, they found that the ones that performed best matched the amount of variability seen in the brain, suggesting that the brain may have evolved to have just the right amount of variability for optimal learning. So if we allow the network to combine slow and fast information, it was better able to solve tasks in more complicated real-world settings. So, we demonstrated that AI can be brought closer to how our brains work by emulating certain properties, but they're far from achieving the level of energy efficiency that we found in our brain. So we're born with this natural gift of our brain and learning, but it's so hard for us to figure out the right models to use, because we want to put this down to a math, to a science. We want to figure out how can we learn so fast, and how can we come up with methods, artificial intelligence methods, to help us learn like that. How can we do that? So, that's what they were finding out. They were coming up with, tweaking the time, how quickly each cell decides what it wants to do based on the cells connected to it. So some cells will decide very quickly. They'll look at only what the connected cells are doing. Other cells are slower to react, basing their decision on what other cells have been doing for a while. So, they're trying to figure out the variability in each of these neurons. How can we add that variation, so if certain neurons are connected to other neurons, how can we kind of use that? How can we use what's going on in our brain to help us learn? So all of this is how our brain can help us learn. That this guy is a cat. He's a cat, a very, very cute cat. He's a very cute cat. And what is the difference between a real cat and a fake cat? How can we learn that? Oh, he's very cute. So I just want to hope I can motivate you guys into that and helping you guys understand basically how, cats, and seeing what is a real cat versus what is not a real cat, how we can do all this detection, see his little whiskers, his ears, his little nose, his little paw. You can see all these things. So hopefully this gives you some more motivation on how we can use biology to help us learn about artificial intelligence and vice versa. This guy is a cute little British short hair. Hi, my little guy. And sadly, this one tries to emulate it, but I know this is not a real cat, and sadly, But the AI needs to also recognize that this is not a real cat. So again, thank you for watching this video, and please let me know if you have any questions at all and how I can help you guys. And I just hope that this sort of ties in why we stress the biology, because the biology is so important to helping us ultimately understand how to make artificial intelligence better, where does it come from, how essentially, if we want to make things that are artificially intelligent, why not learn from our brain? One of the best masters in the whole world that evolution has shown is so complex, so amazing, so gifted at helping us learn these complex relationships. So why not try to figure out how to model the human brain in a mathematical way, so that if we give these robots lots and lots of images, lots and lots of data of all different types, it can learn a model and artificially be intelligent to make a prediction. Is this a cat? Is this a dog? And whatnot. So that's why the biology matters, because if you understand the biology, you might be able to help better develop AI, artificial intelligence, algorithms as well, because it's all kind of based on how the brain works. You know, why reinvent the wheel if you already have some idea of what makes us intelligent, but we don't understand the whole picture. And what also was brought to me, which is really, really interesting, is that there are still so many cell types, again, that are out there. So there's this article on a Rosetta Stone for neuroscience. So a new atlas helps define brain cell types. You know, they can help us treat brain diseases. But what we just identified, this just came out as well on October 6, 2021. Tens of billions of neurons, an inventory of the brain cell types. And neuroscientists have struggled, with this. So over 400 researchers, were needed in a network to come up with the most comprehensive inventory to date, analyzing millions of human, marmoset, mouse cells from a brain region that is involved in coordinating movement. And what they did is they identified more than 100 cell types in the brain. And this could help us define the types of cells affected by brain diseases, corresponding cells in animal models, better target those cells with treatment. So it's like a Rosetta Stone. So the Rosetta Stone, I've actually seen it in the UK before. It's in the British Museum, which is free, for you guys. You guys can go check it out as well. It's in the British Museum. But this is the Rosetta Stone. It's like that kind of, big thing that we've learned. People are trying to figure out the location, shape, and function as well. So what they kind of have shown is that, it can change the way that researchers model brain disease. We don't have a framework yet for understanding what cell types, it's expressed in. It's going to be difficult, but we're kind of entering a stage where we know how much we don't know, and that's progress. So what's really exciting is that we figured out new cell types. It's a new atlas. It's expanding the frontiers. But with that, we're sort of realizing that, hey, there's so many cell types. There are a lot of cell types. This looks like t-SNE, t-neighbor, stochastic neighbor embedding. It's just like one statistical approach to work and figure out like the cell types. But we're figuring out how much we don't know, and that gives goosebumps, because like we're learning that, oh my gosh, we actually don't know a lot. And, the single cell type variability can be very helpful in even artificial intelligence, helping treat brain diseases and so much. So neuroscience, I feel like, is an integral part of, understanding artificial intelligence. And of course, you can just write algorithms. You don't need to understand the biology, but understanding it can help you innovate it and better appreciate where this came from and why these complicated models can help us try to approximate artificial intelligence artificially.